a strong enough correlation between being fat and having certain bad health outcomes, that they can focus their suggestions on those in virtue of trying to get people to be healthier rather than trying to get them to not be fat.
I mean, meta-analyses, I think, cast doubt on that suggestion about the relationship between diet and weight loss. So what Tracy Mann and Janet Tomoyama and her team looked at was these are medical researchers who set out to discover what's the best method for weight loss, like what's the best diet to induce weight loss, with a similar set of assumptions as the ones that you just mentioned, that like surely reducing cholesterol or surely going low fat or going low carb, like one of these will turn out to be the best method. And what they found was surprising to this team, which is that when they looked at every single longitudinal study of diets of all of these different kinds, so, you know, something like 20,000 participants in total in the first study, more like hundreds of thousands in the second, which was done in 2014. In every one of those cases of diets that were studied over a 4 to 5 year period, they were not effective in reducing people's weight. So people would often lose weight over a year or 2 years, but the weight regain is really inexorable for the vast majority of bodies. So look, I think it's fine to think about certain kinds of health measures that we can take with respect to our own diets. I do worry a little bit, and we can get into this later, about whether prescriptive advice to restrict food can be triggering for some people who have a vulnerability to disordered eating or even eating disorders. So when it comes from a prescriptive place from a doctor, I think we have to be more careful there. But even those health measures like a low carb diet, a low fat diet, a low cholesterol diet, a vegan diet, all of these ways of approaching diet didn't lead to long-term weight loss. And what this team said, which was really interesting, was dieting does too much harm and too little good to be recommended as a safe, effective treatment for obesity, a word I put in quotes because it's not one of my words. I think it's stigmatizing. They said that they also found, based on their, again, meta-analyses of every single study, not just one or two, but every major diet study they could find that was sufficiently high quality and sufficiently longitudinal, that between 1/3 and 2/3 of participants in these studies regain more weight than they lose, again, over a 4 to 5 year period. So it's just surprising, but it appears to be true that diet, and even diet and exercise in combination, is just not the key to long-term weight loss. We don't really know what will make fat bodies thin in the long term. Bodies are really good at guarding against fat loss, it turns out.
Do we know for offhand those studies whether people regained the weight who had stayed in line with the optimal dietary cases that they were giving, or was it that they lost the weight and then they changed their diet or their activity in some way that resulted in them gaining it back?
So these are people who were on the diet for 4 to 5 years. It doesn't mean there was perfect adherence. That would be extremely unlikely. But there's also a question about why we would want perfect adherence, given we want to study like real world conditions of, well, how do people actually do if they go on the Mediterranean diet for 4 or 5 years? What happens? And yeah, they regained the weight.